our speaker today. Dr. De Cillis is an associate professor at the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London, teaching Shia Islam and Islamic intellectual history. She is also managing editor of the Shia Heritage series and acting head of the Shia Studies unit. She has authored several books, including Salvation and Destiny in Islam, the Shia Ismaili Perspective of Ḥamīd ad-Dīn al-Kirmānī, and Free Will and Predestination in Islamic Thought, Theoretical Compromises in the works of Avicenna, al-Ghazali, and Ibn Arabi. She co-translated the Proof of God, Shia Mysticism, in the work of al-Kulāni, and co-edited Shia Esotericism, Its Roots and Developments. She also wrote and published several journal and encyclopedia articles, and she previously taught at the School of Oriental and African Studies and at Birkbeck College, University of London. Her research interests include Islamic metaphysics, Sufism, Shia esotericism, and Ismaili philosophy. Dr. Toby Meyer, our discussant, is Senior Research Associate in Quranic Studies at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. He has taught graduate courses on Muslim philosophy, Sufism, and Quranic exegesis at the Institute of Ismaili Studies and at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. He has published a number of books, including Struggling with the Philosopher, a refutation of Avicenna's metaphysics, and Avicenna's allegory on the soul, and Ismaili interpretation, co-authored with Wilfred Madelung, as well as a translation and study of Najmuddin al-Kubra's Fawaih al-Jamal, which is forthcoming. He has focused for a number of years on researching the Ismaili-influenced theology of Shahrastani through his Quranic commentary. So the topic of our today's talk is the concept of sympathy in Greek heritage. And to give you an idea of timelines, we will start with Dr. De Cillis' talk, which will last between 30 and 40 minutes, followed by a discussion led by Dr. Meyer and questions from the audience. So the whole session today should take between 1 hour and 1 hour and a half. And for our online audience, just a reminder that if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A box and not the chat, because we won't be able to monitor the chat. Yeah, I guess that's it for me. Please, Maria.
Thank you very much, Ḥamīd, for inviting me to talk tonight, and thank you also to Toby for accepting to be the discussant tonight. Thank you to all of you present here and the people following us on the internet. So what I'm trying to be doing today is just to provide you with a brief excursus of how the concept of sympathy has traveled, let's say, journeyed across time and across different intellectual traditions. However, as a little disclaimer, I'm not trying to provide any intellectual history here. I'm not trying to pinpoint how sources have been used or transmitted. What I'm trying to do is just tackle, let's say, this elephant in the room in a positive sense. The concept of sympathy seems to have been ever present throughout different intellectual traditions. And it really struck me when I was studying, when I was focusing on the works of one of the most influential Ismaili philosophers of all time, Ḥamīd al-Kirmānī, was been actually the focus of my research here for the past, let's say, 8 to 10 years. But I have also an Italian heritage. So I've been also studying the classics, let's say, of Italian Renaissance intellectuals, such as Pico della Mirandola or Marsilio Ficino. And part and parcel of my discussions tonight will be trying to really, I'm not saying understanding, but try to pinpoint how the concept of sympathy has been used throughout these different intellectual traditions and how it's been adapted and moderated somehow. So just as a brief introduction, the term sympathy is derived from the Greek sympatheia, which is basically the understanding of a feeling together. This is what the concept really is. So it's derived from the two words, sim, fellow, together, and pathos obviously meaning passion. In the words of some Italian Renaissance intellectuals, such as Marsilio Ficino, the word has been translated into Latin as compassion. Okay, so according to the etymology, the original etymology of the word, sympathy would mean, and that's how we perceive it today, as to suffer together or to feel compassion. And in particular, in our modern world, it has been interpreted as a form of affective subjectivity, which is usually exemplified by the formula, I feel for you, I feel something towards you, I share something with you, I feel compassion for you. However, in the ancient Greco-Roman concept, this had very little to do with this kind of first personal perspective, and it was instead used, particularly in the Hellenistic period, to make sense of the natural world. So to basically understand across a plethora of disciplines from philosophical psychology to natural history, magic to medicine, cosmology to astrology, how actually the world works. And particularly the term sympathy and the opposite antipathy, which could find its origin in the Amicus, in Epicurean, in the Stoic thought, in the Neoplatonic philosophy, became a focal point, focal concept in the natural philosophy up to the 16th to the 17th centuries, and proved to be very, very influential in trying, in particular, across the European Renaissance. And sympathy as such was identified as the main force operating throughout the cosmos and came to be applied as a proper doctrine, particularly in Renaissance alchemy, magic, and medicine. And this concept was largely applied, let's say, in a more kind of varied way, in a less straightforward way, in a more implicit way, also in the adjusted Neoplatonic emanative schemas of some major Ismaili philosophers. In particular, the philosophers that nowadays are recognized as being part of the Iranian school of Ismaili philosophical theology that were operating throughout the Fatimid era, and I'm referring here in particular to Abū Maʿshar Cillis, but also Ḥamīd al-Kirmānī, and later on, obviously, some of the concepts will be also elaborated by another Ismaili intellectual, that Nasir-i Khusraw. And I will be indicating how somehow the concept of sympathy was reinterpreted as that of correspondence, as that of balance within the Fatimid Ismailism. When I was studying on Ḥamīd al-Kirmānī, trying to guide my monograph, I came across a work by Professor Desmet that was titled The Sacredness of Nature in Shi'a Ismaili Islam. And I came across this quotation. Obviously, this quotation is from an Italian writer, Umberto Eco. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He was a journalist, but also a very solid intellectual. And what he says, so I'm just going to read this. I'm going to read it in Italian. La totalità, you have the translation there. La totalità del cosmo nella sua unità fondamentale e divina poggia su una catena ininterrotta dell'essere, la simpatia cosmica. E la simpatia cosmica si manifesta attraverso rapporti di somiglianza. Cosmic sympathy means that there exists correspondences, a sense of balance and relations of proportionality between microcosm and microcosm. Another good definition of sympathy that came across is that provided by Thomas in Magie de la Raison, where he provides a proper definition of what sympathy is and how it works. There is no sympathy without the transmission of an active principle A to a passive object P by the visible vehicle B, which connects A and P. The necessary condition for this transmission to succeed is the existence of a relationship of similarity, convenience, or analogy. For this reason, the notion of sympathy is historically related to those of love and compassion, concord and agreement, correspondence and convenience, analogy and similarity. It manifests itself in the form of attraction of the like unto like, of a natural tension intended to fill either a physical or a psychological void or a lack of order. Now, the expression like unto like, I think all of us are quite familiar with it. And in fact, its origin in the hermetic corpus. And it's been translated as usually that which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above, which has been actually found in one of the first reference to this concept can be found in a paraphrase of the second verse of the Emerald Tablet, which was a very short hermetic corpus dating back between the late 8th to the early 9th century. And the hermetic corpus was very much and would have been very much influential, not only in the works of early, let's say, medieval thinkers, but also in particular become fundamental in the interpretation of the concept of sympathy throughout the Renaissance time, so between the 16th and the 17th century. Another point that really struck me in the definition of sympathy is this idea of natural tension. The idea of tensions or kinesis is what can be found at the core of the Stoic interpretation of sympathy. The concept of cosmic sympathy comes to be for the first time probably, or like slightly earlier, found in the works of the so-called Stoas, the Stoics. We are talking about 4th century, so it's quite early. And what is the core of the Stoic understanding of sympathy? Is basically this understanding that the whole cosmos is really a living organism. And sympathy comes to refer to the coexistence of elements in a unified structure, which is characterized by very dynamic character, and in which all the elements that belong to this dynamic character, this unified structure, exist only and exclusively in mutual interaction with the rest. So the cosmos was really conceived as a unified body where the coordinated transformations of the many and apparently unlinked parts of this body testified the necessity for something binding them all together. And the Stoics identified this cohesive force in what is referred to as pneuma, which is the breath through which the universe breathes, and as a proper breath, as a proper action of breathing, the universe would expand and contract. By contracting, the pneuma would guarantee cohesion of all things. By expanding, it would give and would associate forms to matter. So the notion of sympathy in the Stoic context is basically linked to the fact that the whole universe, the whole cosmos is a living organism, that it breathes, and all the parts of these organisms are connected together through the pneuma. So even things that seem not to be conjunct and not in adjacent to each other are really in a strong relationship. And even, for instance, the Stoics would discuss, because the Stoics were corporealists, so they would discuss even the breath, even the conception of the soul was very much addressed in a corporeal sense. And so they would say that, for instance, when we look at a person that has a illness, we can see that some parts of the body are affected. For instance, the head with the hands, even if they are not contiguous to each other. And the fact that this would happen would have been explained in terms of sympathetic relations. Another point that really struck me in analyzing the Stoic understanding of sympathy is the creation of, is basically the making of oneness out of multiplicity, in the formation of connections between the parts. So what we read in some of the extant literature produced by the Stoics, or the later literature, I've been referring to the Stoics corpus, variations in the pneumatic tensions give rise to an ascending hierarchy of bodies within the class of unified bodies, and very much akin to the understanding of Aristotle of the Scala Naturae, So the fact that everything in nature is organized according to hierarchies, very specific and structured hierarchies, the highest levels of the cosmos are believed to encompass the parts pertaining to the lower levels. Pneuma or intellect, a fundamental point for the Stoics was that this pneuma is identified not only as a mind or as an intellect, but also as fate, as providence, sometimes as a minor god. And this is something that we find, for instance, Ḥamīd and al-Kirmānī's interpretation of first intellect is identified as fate, as providence, as mind, as reason, as the first originated thing. I'm not saying here, I'm not establishing any direct link, but it is quite striking to find this kind of formulations. So the pneuma, or the intellect, although not equally distributed throughout, is thought to be everywhere, pulling together the separate parts into a single whole. And through sympathy, the world in its diversity is basically unified. So sympathy comes to explain the multitude existing in the world and the oneness of the world. In Alexander of Aphrodisias, for instance, on the tractate Abū Maʿshar, it refers to the work of Chrysippus, holding that the whole is unified by breath, which pervades it completely, and by which the universe is held together and stabilized, that it's in sympathetic with itself. The same we find in Plutarch, or similar expression. The world is governed by nature, is breathing, and is in sympathy with itself. Now, Plotinus, as we know, is the major exponent of Platonism. Neoplatonism, as a philosophical current, comes to imbue the Ismaili corpus, in particular in the works of Sigistani, Sigistanis, and the development that was brought forward by Farabi was later adopted by Ḥamīd al-Kirmānī. Plotinus inherits a lot from the Stoics, but obviously was not a corporealist. So his understanding of how sympathetic relations actually work was a bit different from what the Stoics would have talked about. And Plotinus speaks of sympathetic relations, in particular in connection to two things. First and foremost, he explains that any sympathetic affection, even in human beings, is but a function of the unity of the world soul, in which human beings, through the animation of their bodies, have a share. So basically, humans, to the movements, through the let's say, the kinesis, to the movements that happen in us, we have a share in the movements and the transformations that the human soul undergoes, we have a share in what is the world soul. But another important point in which Plotinus talks about sympathy is in the discussion of vision, the transmission of vision. And I will give you some quotations for you to understand what I'm talking about here. In part of the Aeneas, you have the reference there, Plotinus states that this one universe is all sympathetic and is like one living creature, and that which is far is really near. Just as in one of the individual living things, a nail or horn or a finger or one of the other limbs, which is not contiguous, the intermediate part leaves a gap in the affection that is not affected by that which is not here. For similar parts are not situated next to each other, but they are separated by others in between, yet they are sympathetic by their likeness, the like unto like. So sympatheia is explained because there is a form of resemblance, a form of likeness between these parts that are not in communication with each other. And this is explained, in most cases, as the share of soulness between what is the world soul and what is the human soul. But another point that Plotinus makes is when he discusses the notion of vision, or let's say that the phenomenon of vision. Basically, Plotinus introduces sympathy as a solution to the investigation. It basically states that the eye and the object of seeing are related sympathetically, and their similarity allows one to be affected by the other. The body between, so basically what he says, usually between my eye and the object of my vision, there's usually a transparent body, which we would identify as air, in between. The part in between is not affected by the sympathetic relations. The only way for my eye to perceive a certain thing is because my eye actually shares a sympathetic affinity with the object of my vision. That's how the seeing, the action of seeing would have been explained by Plotinus. And this is very similar to what, for instance, Plato in his Timaeus would have explained. For instance, this is a quotation from Timaeus 45 BT. Whenever the stream of vision is surrounded by midday light, it flows out like unto like, distributes the motions of every object it touches, or whereby it is touched throughout all the body, even unto the soul. So all this happens because there is a similar nature, there is a similarity in nature. So vision is explained in terms of like is known by like. My eye sees the object because it shares a similarity with it. And this is something that would have been discussed also in a kind of more atomistic way by other pedagogists, for instance. Now, I'm going to jump here because I don't have much time, but I really wanted to see how the concept of sympathy has been treated, for instance, within Islam. And one, let's say, evident use of sympathetic affections, of the notion of sympathy, happens in al-Kindī. In particular, it really underlies and underpins the concept of astral causation, as Kindī has treated in his work called derived on rays. Similarly to the discussions that Plotinus has advanced on seeing, al-Kindī employs the physical element of astral rays as the key to explain the sympathetic relations occurring between planets and generated things. So what is in this work called On Rays, what Kindī says is that rays through which remote objects can be moved and altered are effective mainly due to the ruling harmony underscoring the cosmos, with rays absorbing almost the same functions as the Stoics' pneuma. Basically, what al-Kindī stated is that there exists a universali harmonia, a universal harmony. And because this universal harmony, all parts of the cosmos are somehow brought together, okay? And this is possible, the efficiency of, for instance, the operations of the heavenly bodies are made possible on this earth because everything really emanates rays. And some rays found themselves in sort of an agreement, and some others are in a disagreement. So it speaks of rays as having a causal action on what happens on Earth only if there is a sympathetic affection between the rays coming from above, rays coming from the heavenly spheres, and what is found on this planet in wonder, generation, and corruption. al-Kindī really stresses this statement of the like unto like, particularly by referring to the relationship of the microcosm and microcosm. There are throughout his works, his philosophical works, constant reminders of the fact that, of course, we are simply a microcosm, reflecting a microcosm, and this is meant us to be out to the world itself because there is an existentia proporzionata, a balanced existence that is made possible to this harmonic universe. And this existentia proporzionata, the idea of balance, is core and is absolute key to the Fatimid understanding of the the Ismaili understanding as expressed in the Fatimid times, in particular, of the concept of sympathy. The concept of the balance of religion, the mīzān and al-diyāna, the understanding that the whole cosmos is really characterized by a perfect harmony, a perfect correspondence. There is a relationship of analogy and a strict equilibrium existing among all levels of creation. This is something Professor Desmet has been writing upon very, very intensely. So, as I mentioned to you before, amongst the representatives of Fatimid Ismailism, particularly the Iranian school of Ismaili philosophical theology, we find Abū Maʿshar Sijistani. He speaks in particular of two levels of reality, and each element in these two realms, in these two worlds, in these two dimensions, has a proper correspondence. The same goes for Ḥamīd in al-Kirmānī, who actually speaks of 5 different realms. And what is really striking in particular is in the works of Ḥamīd in al-Kirmānī, in particular his masterpiece called the Repose of the Intellect. Ḥamīd al-Kirmānī strenuously tries to identify correspondences amongst all these different levels, all these different units. They seem to be unrelated, but they have and share some likeness, some sort of correspondence. For instance, in the diagram that I will be showing later on, she emphasizes, for instance, that the arithmetic quality of the number 3 are reflected in the third intellect. So we are here in the intellectual realm, in the third celestial sphere. So we are here in the celestial, in the astronomical sphere, in the faculty of the human soul, in the third level of the religious hierarchy, in the third restrictions of the divine law. It talks about the sun as emerging as the planet presiding over the sixth celestial sphere, the number 6 in the Alia oracle, the action of almsgiving in the al-Dīn. This is something that is present in our oracle. Obviously not like this. This is something that has been translated by Conceptual. So you can see that there is a clear attempt to underscore all these similarities and all these correspondences between, for instance, the attitude, the degrees of the angelical worlds, their functions, with what are the degrees of the terrestrial world and their functions. This is an exemplification of what we find in the one of the diagrams that appear in the oracle, where we find the representatives and members of the elementarian, the realm of nature, corresponding to the representative al-Dīn, so the realm of religion, let's translate it this way. The same goes for Attributa alia with Attributa superior, so representative of the different realms. This is actually courtesy of Russell Harris. This is a diagram that is present in one of the manuscripts that we have here of the oracle, where there is all these circles obviously representing a realm corresponding to each other for some specific reason. Yet another diagram. What al-Kirmānī does is providing an explanation. It tries to provide some form of scientific, of course, for the time, we're talking about the 11th century, some scientific explanation of how there are such correspondences and how these correspondences manifest itself. Sometimes the explanations seem a bit unsophisticated, let's say, sometimes even a bit amusing. And for instance, in a passage of the oracle, we read, because the mission of the speaking prophet is limited to the exoteric aspect of the revelation, it makes it necessary for the highest sphere to follow but one movement. And he goes on and says, because the esoteric core is without the explanation pertaining to the degree of the higher and subtle ranks, it makes it necessary for the higher spheres to be without any planet. Or the fact that the Hujja is, as you know, one of the Hudud. The fact that the Hujja missions consist in teaching both the esoteric and the exoteric aspects, so the two forms of worship by action and knowledge, makes it necessary for the element head to combine in itself both the characteristics of heat and humidity. Likewise, because the Hujja's mission is a combination of the esoteric core, which is the worship to action and knowledge, it makes it necessary for the element water to combine in itself both coldness and humidity. Or another passage, because the belief that man, the sun, is like a microcosm with respect to the macrocosm, makes it necessary for the water surrounding the earth to make the form of a human being, as it was perceived in the specific geographical instance. So sometimes these correspondences seem a bit forced, but obviously there was an intention to really justify and come to the point of understanding how this existencia proporcionata, this balanced existence really worked. I came across recently a kind of, I wouldn't say funny, but a very peculiar explanation that was given by Nasir-i Khusraw in his work, Sympathy, that has been translated. I've used the translation produced by Eddie Comsby. So the translation is in Between Reason and Liberation, to Wisdom's Reconciled. And the chapter is titled Properties of Minerals, Animals, and Places, in which Nasir-i Khusraw tries to provide an explanation for the affinities intercurring, for instance, between the magnet and the iron, or the affinity between a mouse and a leopard. And initially, what I was reading was an attempt to provide a proper scientific explanation. For instance, in the case of the magnet drawing to itself iron, Nasir-i Khusraw was saying this happens because of both sides, both the magnet and the iron produce some vapors and they therefore attract each other. So kind of like almost, I wouldn't say empirical, but let's say scientific attempt to explain this specific property. But then, as an Ismaili, he would also provide a more batini, let's say, explanation of why such thing happens. And he says the response of the Hellenistic to the question of the magnet's property of attracting iron stands apart from other responses. In their view, the stone is the qibla of the adherents of the religion of Islam, the name of which is the station. The place where Abraham, peace upon him, stood is the station of prophecy. For him, Muhammad designated the stone for mankind, that they might know that the magnet stands as an analog for him, and so that other worshippers of God might become his followers. Now, a very funny explanation, for instance, of why the mouse would part of this, but it's just a bit peculiar. Why a mouse? There's a tendency back in those days to see and to observe that the mouse would tend to urinate on a prey that had been bitten by a leopard. And the explanation that is given is that this is because the mouse shares an affinity with the leopard, and such affinity tends him to, makes him urinate so that no other prey would be close to the prey that has been bitten by the leopard, and the mouse would keep this for itself. But obviously, another batini, another Ismaili interpretation is provided, and this is because the affinity between the mouse and the leopard is offered because both these animals are considered to be negative, are considered to be dangerous for mankind. So they come to be interpreted as the enemies of Islam, and in particular of Ismailism. And in the same way as we as humans need to guard against the dangers provided by the mouse or the leopard, in the same way we should guard against the true enemies of the Imam, obviously, and of Islam in general. So this is the explanation it actually provides. The Ḥamīd is that between them, between the mouse and the leopard, there exists an accord, a muwafiqat, in opposition to the Prophet, just as there is a working sympathy, again, muwafiqat, between the leopard and the mouse to harass and vex mankind. And just as it is incumbent on man to guard against this sympathy between leopard and mouse in this world, so it is also incumbent on the godly to know that both leopard and mouse in the sacral realm and to keep a distance from them. Now, I need to jump, I don't know how much time I have left, but yeah, I will just swiftly run through some of the major interpretation of provided to the theory of sympathy within the Italian Renaissance. The theory of sympathy represented fundamental positions in the Renaissance Platonic philosophy, in particular provided by Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. For them, this philosophical concept was of mutual attraction of things, could be used in the art of magic, in the healing of illnesses. But there was also a much more naturalistic interpretation of the phenomenon of sympathy, for instance, provided by this scientist called Jeronimo Fracastoro, who acts in the 16th century. And according to Fracastoro, sympathy and antipathy do not consist of anything supernatural, irrational, or anything to do with cosmic relations, but express the causal regularity of natural events. Basically, in the 16th century, he writes this work called the Contagione, Contagiosus Morbis et Curazione, Contagion, Contagious Diseases and Their Treatment, which is published together with another treatise titled De Sympatheia and Antipathia Rerum, on the sympathy and antipathies of things, in which sympathy and the fact that certain parts of the bodies are affected to each other is for the first time treated as a form of epidemiology. So it's basically identifying for the first time, it is setting a basis for a much more scientific understanding of what sympathy, sympathetic, antipathetic relationship would actually be. And it talks about the idea that these sympathetic relationships really derive from living corpuscles transmissible from one individual to the other. And just to talk very quickly about Pico della Mirandola. Pico della Mirandola operates in the Quattrocento, the 1500s, and he was a proper Renaissance man. He was fascinated by the works of Aristotle, of Ibn Rushd, of Avicenna, but he was very much fascinated also by the Kabbalistic views. And Pico della Mirandola uses only in one instance the word sympatheia. He actually leaves it untranslated, even in his text in the Latin. And he basically uses the word sympatheia to really come to an understanding of the positive aspect of magic, what we call nowadays white magic against the black magic. And he says that the white magic, the latter type of magic, consists in calling forth into the light, as if from their hiding places, the power scattered and sown in the world of the loving kindness of God. And it does not so much work wonders as diligently serve a wonder-working nature. The latter, having more searchingly examined into the harmony of the universe, which the Greeks with greater significance called sympatheia, and having clearly perceived the reciprocal affinity of natures, brings forth into the open the miracles concealed in the recesses of the world. Basically, sympatheia again is used as a word, as a form of defense from what would have been the accusations of the church towards a certain kind of magic. Some of the works by Ficino were confiscated and were burned because considered dangerous, okay, propounding something dangerous about the act of magic. So what Pico della Mirandola is actually stating is that what the true magic and what we would be later conceived as natural magic is basically the action of bringing forth not the occult properties embedded in the nature, but what has always been there, what a loving God has produced, and it's up to the ingenuity of mankind to understand how things actually work. And the impact that the notion of sympatheia has is in this, it's really based on this. We can use the understanding of the Greek in order to extrapolate what has always been visible, what the God has created for us. It's up to us as Renaissance people, you would say, to bring forth the same understanding of positivity of sympatheia and the positivity of certain kind of magic, natural magic, would have been also stressed by another intellectual, another Renaissance man called Giambattista della Porta, which uses the concept of sympathetic relationships for cavar segreti, which means extrapolate the hidden qualities of nature. It has shown the understanding of this friendship or the contrary, so these sympathetic and antipathetic relationships that by contemplation man could extrapolate something advantageous, so to his advantage. So we're talking here like 17th century, a man, Giambattista della Porta, who operated in particular between Naples but also Florence. He was a propounder of the explanation of magic as a natural phenomenon, nothing to do with the occult properties of more threatening kind of magic. So I'm just briefly concluding. Thank you very much for your attention, for your patience. So I hope I could just illustrate very, very, very briefly how this understanding of sympathy is basically there. It's just that it needs a lot of investigation in order to really create, to really provide, let's say, intellectual history of the concept. And hopefully, whenever I have a little bit of time, I'll try to interpret that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. And if I can abuse a little bit of my position of the chair, it's just a little comment rather than a question. When you were talking, it brought to my mind this alchemical literature and Jabir ibn Hayyan with his, the expression of al-mīzān, the science of balance. If my memory is good, out of which come all the all the occult sciences, like alchemy, astrology, and
yeah,
so different kinds of sympathy with different.
very much so. Thank you for this. Actually, I should have mentioned. So Jabir ibn Hayyan obviously was mainly an alchemist, and was probably mainly interested in investigating the, let's say, the more kind of material sympathies and the correspondences across minerals, plants, and things pertaining to this proper terrestrial realm. But he also indicated that it might have been possible, obviously, to apply the science of the balance, so this al-mīzān, to the hypostasis of the intellectual dimension. And obviously, he really envisaged a kind of system encompassing all these degrees of reality. So the corpus of Jabir ibn Hayyan is huge, and obviously these sympathies and antipathies are very much related to the chemical dimension. So that's worth investigating. But yeah, I mean, for the sake of this presentation, I did that. Thank you.
Thank
Definitely,
you.
there is that.
Thank you. So I pass the floor to our discussant, Dr. Abū Maʿshar.
The idea of sympathy is part of the definition of Antoine Fèvre, of esotericism per se, very French sort of exercise, defining it through criteria. The first is correspondence, and the second is sympathy, actually, out of the four main ones. So what I get from the idea of correspondence and the Arabic words like munasaba, mutabaka, and so forth, is a more intellectual coordination of the elements of the cosmos. And in sympathy, what I sense is the idea of the universe as nature, as alive, as a unity, with these empathetic correspondences between its various elements. So what is the actual word for sympathy in Arabic? What would that be?
Oh, muwafiqa is the one that is probably closest. And then, as you said, the the other is correspondence, but also this idea of balance, really.
Balance, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just to refer to what you said, I think, as you said, the notion of sympathy, particularly what I understood it to be the core of the Stoic discourse, but also to a certain extent also Iamblichus talks about the interconnectedness. So the fact that everything is connected, all the parts of the universe are connected, because the universe, the cosmos, is nothing else but a breathing organism, this huge it's a one body made of many parts where everything is really interconnected. And Iamblichus would talk about the light of the gods permeating all sorts of dimensions. So whatever is far is actually near, whatever is near is far. So there is very much an intellectual element to it. In terms of Ismailism, I think the fact that they would talk about balance and correspondences rather than proper sympathies, somehow they wanted to make sense of what they believed to be these different realms. So perhaps just basing their discourses on the proper the Stoic, for instance, understanding of even the Neoplatonic understanding of sympathy would have not sufficed. So there was this is
cosmology
because of the cosmology, but also because of their belief in the specific functions of all the hudūds. The fact that each ranks of the hudūd needed to be specific and corresponding to what are the different intellects. For instance, in Ḥamīd in al-Kirmānī, I'm referring to the fact that there has to be somehow almost a rational, although it's not rational, but rational explanations of why every single element in the whole cosmic system has its proper function, and how these can provide a form of justification or an explanation for all the specific roles that all the members of the al-Dīn, for instance, would have to have. And we have to understand also that in Ismailism, and in particular, I'm referring here to Ḥamīd in al-Kirmānī because it's the author I'm more familiar with, true knowledge was not only knowledge of the Imam and obviously following the teaching of the Imam, but understanding of all the previous Imams up to the very last member of this al-Dīn. So, so somehow this concept of correspondence, this concept of balance needed to be in place.
It's fascinating. So we can see this idea of sympathy somehow being a key to many different interpretive systems. You haven't mentioned Sufism. How do you think it connects with this whole?
I think it's very much there. This understanding of, well, I mean, Sufism sometimes it gets confused also with monism. You know, there is, for instance, in the works, for instance, of Ibn Arabi, this understanding that existence is existence. The only real existence, the existence of God, is the reality, the ultimate reality. It could be linked to this understanding that really, for instance, al-Kindī will speak of this harmonia universalis as the only true existing things. Everything is possible. Even the rays are efficient. These celestial rays are efficient just because there is this substratum of universal harmonia there. So because of that, because there is one real thing, the only efficient causality is not truly that of the rays, but that of God that has allowed this harmonia universalis to be in place. So somehow probably that could be linked to, I don't know, how do you see it linked to Sufism? You're the expert on Sufism.
No, I mean, well, Najmuddin Kubra actually says our path is a path of alchemy. I think it's one of the closest marriages between the alchemical way and Islamic mysticism. And he says that tariquna tariqul kimiyya. So he brings in these Hermetic principles, including things you've mentioned. He says yakun al-jins munasiban bi jinsi. So the whole like to like. In fact, he quotes another earlier Sufi who says the whole of the path is like to like. So he really marries the two together. And actually, I was thinking in terms of Sufi cosmologies. I was thinking of Ibn Arabi and the idea of Rahma, divine Rahma, and its its existentiating function, and that is a very affective idea, isn't it? And so, but I of course was thinking in terms of the more pedestrian scholarly question of the transmission of these ideas from Arabic and I suppose Persian into the Italian Renaissance. And what is your view of that? What would be the prime?
Well, the Picatrix obviously would be a kind of mainstream text. That's probably the first, the most instinctive answer.
So that is
the Hermetic corpus, yeah, very much so. But as I said, particularly in the works of Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, Giambattista della Porta, Pamponazzi, Agrippa, I can't pronounce his name, but Agrippa. So we are talking about people operating between the, let's say, the 400, so the 15th to the 16th to the 17th century. The focus was trying really to understand how the so-called art of magic could be potentially used to serve mankind. Okay, there was a sense of criticism, of course, on behalf of the church, because the Catholic Church in particular, because magic and the practitioners of magic would be seen with suspicion as operating a cult, bringing forward some kind of occult operations, so substituting themselves to the creation, the only creation that is really operated by God. But the endeavor of these Renaissance intellectuals was that actually of specifying that there could be let's say, diabolical aspect to magic, but the art of magic that intellectual like them really wanted to focus on, and writing they were writing about was the understanding of magic as the operation that somebody in the knowledge would activate by simply looking at creation. Creation reveals itself as a wondrous operation that is obviously brought forward by the only creator that is God. So nobody was denying that. Pico della Mirandola was a Catholic priest. So his understanding of ultimate philosophy, his ultimate understanding of what philosophy should be, is not offering a certain privileged status, for instance, to the work of Ibn Rushd or to the work of the Kabbalah, but he would search a form of pax philosophica, as he called it, so philosophical peace, that he would set aside the pax Christiana, so the Christian peace, and he would say that the only way we can understand this world, the only way we could actually come to ultimate knowledge and ultimate philosophy, is to really look at the wonders that creation, that the Creator has granted us. And we can see, we can perceive that we are part and parcel of this creation, because we share as souls, as individual souls, we share this affinity with the world soul. He would actually refer to the Pythagoreans, to the word amicizia. The amicizia the Pythagoreans were referring to, the friendship the Pythagoreans were referring to, is actually this coming to an understanding that we got to be in harmonious way with each other, but also to a more kind of epistemological level, not only ontological, but to a more epistemological level. So the true answer for him would be pax, peace.
That's fascinating. I mean, the other thing which occurred to me was how current, sticking my neck out, but how live again this sort of worldview is becoming. And I'm thinking of the contest between emergentism, I'm thinking particularly of consciousness and reductionism, and a kind of revival of panpsychism.
Right.
So I think all of this is actually strangely of great interest again.
Yeah, I think the discourse on panpsychism is very much actual, is very much current, and I mean, from where, I don't know if you're familiar with the panpsychism, means that there is consciousness everywhere. Pan means all in Greek, and psychism means psyche. So the fact that the soul, there is this understanding that this world is a conscious being, so to speak. And this is very, I mean, it's quite outstanding how this discourse is coming back again. I'm familiar, for instance, with the work of Carlo Rovelli on quantum physics, and so this revival, this endeavor to understand how quantum physics actually works, and how this is linked with the Stoic understanding, for instance, of the fact that this world is conscious, that everything is conscious, that the planetary spheres have a proper consciousness. They are, they are alive, okay, and have awareness, not knowledge, but awareness. So I think that was the question.
Let's check that out.
And thanks again, Maria and Toby, for being with us today, and to everyone for joining us in person and online. Thanks also to everyone who supported the preparation and delivery of this lecture behind the scenes. Special thanks to Nigina Mirboskhonova, Akil Zanani, also Nushin Premji, Sanan Aliyev, and our Department of Communications and Development, and to the events team. Thanks again, and I hope you will join us also for the next installations of this lecture series.